Hi and welcome to the Geek Legion of Doom. This is a B-movie review and I'll be having a look at the movie Dracula, the Dark Prince. Now this is not to be confused with the very similar sounding The Dark Prince Legend of Dracula, which was a movie of some years ago starring Rudolph Martin. This is actually a 2013 movie starring Jon Voight. So the movie starts with the prologue basically showing us as Dracula, as he's a human, as he's a mortal man, ultimately the Prince of Transylvania, and he's sort of defending against the Turks, and he's betrayed by people in his own court, his holy men ultimately, who decide they want to overthrow him and kill his lover, his princess. And in a fit of rage, Dracula basically kills all of them and kind of renounces God in front of the cross and whatnot, and thus is cursed to become a vampire. Then cut to 100 years later, and basically the setup for this movie is there's essentially a kind of a war going between Dracula and his kind of undead forces and the kind of, I guess, the humans really, and a lot of them are referred to as slayers, and basically those people ultimately kind of trying to fight against the forces of darkness. And it basically focuses on a kind of group of heroes, so to speak, including two sisters. And they're kind of due to meet up with Jon Voight's character, who's playing one of the Van Helsing descendants. And there's kind of an artifact, basically, which can be used as a kind of a weapon to defeat Dracula. And these two sort of sisters run into this sort of group of thieves, and ultimately they decide that they want to steal this kind of relic. And ultimately sort of they join forces at the end of the day. And trying to sort of go against Dracula, who ultimately manages to grab one of the sisters, the older sister, and of course this is the older sister that just happens to be the reincarnation of his long lost love, and this kind of sets up a love triangle between this kind of, I forget the character's name, but the kind of the female lead, I suppose, Dracula, and this guy Lucian, who's like the head of this kind of band of thieves ultimately, and it's up to the remaining heroes to try and save the girl basically, and defeat Dracula and all his minions. Let's go have a look at it in a little bit of a further detail. So it's a very low budget movie, and it kind of looks it. There's a lot of scenes where it looks like the budget is really just breaking under the weight of what it wants to do. That said, however, I will say that they are some very sort of good choices in regards to some kind of like cinematography, and in regards to its budget, I think it has a very good sort of gothic-y atmosphere with it, and there are some fantastic lighting effects and things like that. It does have, like I say, a very cheap feel to it. A lot of the kind of the sort of stonework, for example, in the castle looks very like polystyrene and stuff like that. So if you're a fan of the B-movie type films, you are going to like this. And this is a B-movie through and through. This is why I haven't really classed it as necessarily a horror film or a medieval film. Now, a couple of observations about this movie. The guy who plays Dracula, it looks to me that they've actually made him resemble the characters from Castlevania. I kind of look at him and he's very sort of reminiscent of the kind of the Castlevania sort of video game series. Now, I don't know if that is actually something that they've done on purpose or it is purely coincidental, but I couldn't help but notice. But I actually kind of quite liked his look, although it looks nothing like, obviously, Vlad Tepes from real life. This guy's like a proper pretty boy. I have to say the acting in this movie is very kind of polar opposites. Now, the guy who plays Dracula, I thought did a fairly good job, and I'll kind of come on to his portrayal again into a little bit. But I thought he made him quite an interesting character, and I'm going to bet you pretty much everyone in this movie are going to want the vampires to win. The other sort of piece of, I would say, the good performance is Jon Voight as the kind of Leonardo Van Helsing. And I have to say, he's almost unrecognisable. If I didn't know that it was him starring in this film, I probably wouldn't have picked up on it. He's got a lot of sort of facial hair, and I'm pretty sure he's wearing a fake nose as well. But I have to say, he looks like he's having real fun in the role, and he's kind of chewing the scenery, and it's quite a good role. But the rest of the acting is terrible. The main culprits here is basically, I think it's the guy who plays Lucian is is a terrible actor. His line delivery is absolutely terrible. And he's meant to be, I guess, kind of the hunky hero. Now, I got the impression they're trying to kind of almost get a little bit of this sort of Twilight feel to it by having this kind of like very forced sort of love triangle. And I have to say, Lucian is sort of set up to be the kind of, I guess, the hero, and you've got this sort of girl in the middle, and then sort of Dracula as kind of the other sort of pinnacle in the love triangle here. But I have to say that Lucian as a character, he just seems like a real arrogant dick, and he's almost a little bit rapey, I've got to say, when you first sort of see his sort of character introduced. Now, the female lead basically sort of instantly seems to kind of fall for him after he almost tries to rape her, which is a bit of a weird thing, and he's nicked all her stuff as well. But he's just an unlikable asshole, and you want him to get killed. He's obviously going to be. They've obviously cast him as this like good-looking bloke, but he looks like deer in headlights. I've never seen. Maybe I have, but he's a pretty bad actor, I have to say. His line delivery was absolutely horrible, and you just hope for the whole movie he's going to get killed. But the actual female lead as well is not a lot better. Again, her line delivery is absolutely awful. Maybe not quite as bad as the character who plays Lucian, or the actor who plays Lucian, but nevertheless, it's pretty bad. And there's lots of other kind of again, supporting characters that aren't really all that good. I would say actually the other one who I did quite like was the guy who played Renfield, who is kind of one of Dracula's henchmen. Now, obviously, if you're familiar with Dracula as a novel, this is completely different. This is really just a film based on the character Dracula with no actual relevance of the Bram Stoker novel. But Renfield here is essentially one of Dracula's henchmen, and he's quite a good character, I have to say. And this is one of the things I will say about this movie. You kind of want to spend as much time as you can with Dracula and his vampires ultimately, because their characters, with the exception of Jon Voight, are far more interesting than the heroes. Now they're kind of got, I guess, the main three. Obviously, you've got Dracula himself. You've got Renfield, who appears to be his kind of like advisor almost, and isn't a sort of the bug-eating sort of manservant that you sort of see in some iterations. He's very well spoken, seems to be very organised, very polite. And the other sort of character you've got in Dracula's kind of upper echelons is a character called Wrath, and he's basically the kind of the military sort of general, I suppose. And he's maybe a bit more sort of two-dimensional. He's kind of like this Darth Vader looking sort of knight ultimately. But he has a little bit of an interesting backstory himself, although it's only touched very briefly. Now, as a Dracula himself, I have to say they've, like I said, you'll probably be rooting for Dracula. I think Luke Roberts is the guy who plays Dracula, and he does, an interesting performance, and you kind of want the character to win. However, I think they maybe go a little bit too far, because we're sort of told throughout the film, oh, he's this evil, he's the darkness, and blah, 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 blah. You don't see Dracula do anything evil in this movie. In fact, he's very polite. He actually seems to care about his subordinates. There's a scene where Wrath, who's this kind of knight, gets wounded, and he genuinely seems to care. He seems to be, perfectly sociable to. I wish I could remember her name, but basically the main sort of female lead, and he doesn't seem evil at all, to be honest with you. We're just told he's evil, and I even go so far as to say there's almost a comparison that basically Dracula's motivations are done out of love, whilst the good guys are just done out of blind faith to religion. So it's maybe a little bit of an interesting sort of parallel about who really is kind of almost the good guys to a certain degree, I have to say. But I think they go too far. They kind of make Dracula a little bit of almost a bit of a pussy in this movie. Unfortunately, tries to go to a little bit too much from the old romantic things here and there, and you get to the point where you can kind of get behind Dracula to a certain point, but you kind of want to see him unleash, and he never really does that. Unfortunately, this is a bit of a mixed bag, I have to say, with this movie. There are certain aspects that I quite liked. Now, if you're a kind of a B-movie fan, I think you may be interested in this movie, because there's quite a lot of interesting stuff going on. I quite like some of the designs, even though they are cheap looking. And, I thought it was maybe an interesting take on an original take on a kind of Dracula story. And I'm actually quite interested in the actual historical sort of side of of Vlad Tepes, but that really isn't anything to do with this one, I have to say. But nevertheless, it was an interesting idea here. But I think maybe obviously where it is a sort of low budget film, it just is so cheap in some aspects, and there's just some things that just annoyed me, and some of the sort of the way the script is in regards to making these characters who you're kind of supposed to root for, you just want them to get killed, and they kind of pick up this sort of random warrior halfway through, and he's not really giving anything about who he's supposed to be. But as I say, Lucian should have been better written. The cast, the majority of them at least, were pretty horrible. The kind of effects look cheap. There are some positives here, I've mentioned, but it's going to be a 5 out of 10, so pretty much bang on average. If you are a B-movie fan, if you kind of like your sort of more high budget horror movies or kind of your sort of classic Draculas, you're probably not going to like this movie. But for me personally, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. I think it had some redeeming qualities, so I'm going to give it a flat average score here. So what do you think of it? Leave me a comment. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.